Okay, I filled some jars. I went to the doctor and got home, and you can see some of the pears are browning just a little bit, but they'll lighten up in the cooking process. So I've opened up some lids. I set these lids in here enough to do 2 batches of 7 quarts. All of our lids are smallmouth. We're lucky to even have lids. You cannot find lids in Boise, Idaho today. For 2 weeks, haven't been able to find lids. I was in Weezer, Idaho a few days ago, and they can't find any up there either. So we're going to put a little water in here and soften these up, just kind of sanitize the lids by boiling the water. And take some warm, just hot water and clean the tops of these, making sure there's no foreign materials on the seal of the jar. Like that. Clean that off. Get some clean towel there. Make sure that the tops of those jars are completely clean and ready for the lids. Okay, and then the water level is right up to the bottom of the threads on each of the jars. Looks good. Looks good. I'll go get some rings. Okay, the lids are sterilized. Stuff them out in here. Put a lid on each jar. This step probably isn't 100% critical, because as long as the lid is new and clean out of the package, there's no lint on it or cardboard particles or things like that. Once these jars are in the canner and processed for 30 minutes, they're going to be sterile. Okay, this process is a little bit technical, and it's easy, just technical. So if you wrench down on those rings, then the lid will bulge and bend. If you finger tighten it like that, it should be fine. It needs room to equalize pressure in the lid without bulging the lid. The steam inside the jar can come and go just a little bit. Not much, but just a little bit. It shouldn't be loose. The ring shouldn't be loose, but it needs to be finger tight, just like that. Finger tight. We need 7 jars in our rack. This is the rack. If your rack is bent and one of the jars is above the others, then the rack needs to be straightened, because there's not very much room in the canner above the jars, and there needs to be a level of water of ½ inch to 1 inch above the jars. The water level needs to be above the jars, is what I'm saying. Okay, let's go put these in the canner. We can in the garage in the summertime so that the canner doesn't heat up the house. And so we've used this a couple of days ago, and the water level has apparently evaporated enough that it's not quite covering. So I'm going to take some out of this one and we're going to put in here. That ought to be enough, but it's within 3/4 of an inch from the top of the pan, and it's covering, oh, I'd say 3/4 of an inch, covering the highest jar, 3/4 of an inch. Just needs to cover. This is not a pressure cooker. It's a sterilizing cold pack canning, and the water should cover the jar. We'll bring that to a boil. The burner's on now. We'll bring that to a boil, which will take quite a while from cold. We could have filled this with hot water and filled the jars with hot water, and that would have sped up the process, but it's not completely necessary. I'm going from completely cold. So it will take an hour maybe to heat up the water, or last 30 minutes. Once this comes to a rolling boil, then we will process it for 30 minutes. Okay, let's go make the next batch. We'll fill this other canner with 7 jars. See if we have enough pears. Pears are soft. Pears and peaches are soft. So they're not like raw cucumbers. Raw cucumbers you can stuff in there with anything. You use a wooden stick to stuff them in there and you can hardly hurt a cucumber, but the pears will squish. So you can go a little bit more slowly putting them in and making sure they all fit absolutely perfect in the hole, but I shake mine down. Get them to go down in their groove, make sure all the space is filled, and give it a bit of a shake. Looks like I've got room for a little bit more in that one. Okay, and fill it with water, rinse the jar off. Make sure the water is filling all the cavities in the jar. I'm sure you could be very fancy in how you fill your pears into the jar. There's probably a pear jar filling etiquette. So if I had attended my 4-H classes and knew how to fill pears into the jar, I would be winning an award, but I'll bet these don't win an award. Like that. Okay, we've come to the end of our supply of pears. There's a few here, but there's not enough for another quart. This is jar number 6. Rinse it off, fill it full of water. I have my 7th jar. We also have a few pears left over from the other day and this is just in lemon water in the fridge from when we finished those 2 batches, and so I can take some of these pears now, dump in my lemon bath, and fill this jar. These raw pears have been sitting in water for 2 days, and I can sense that they were pretty ripe, or the water has continued to ripen them since they weren't blanched. They're very soft. Yeah, there's a nice piece. I might take that one out. Just pull him out of there. Anything else worth canning? There's a piece that's not too bad. Yeah, these are really soft, the rest of these. So, pair a couple more pears and prep them for the jar. In the meanwhile, the lids are sterilizing, or heating up to sterilize. Yeah, we're sterilizing. Over there boiling. Sterilization usually takes 10 minutes at boiling temperatures. 3 or 4 more pears for the filling of this last jar. They're slimy, slippery. It's hard to hold on to a pear when you're peeling it like that. I'll tell you though, they're even more slimy when you boil the skins off. You can dip boil for 30 seconds and the skins come off, you know, but they're so slimy, hard to hold on to, and almost always you have to take something and scrape some of the skins off anyway, so I've decided not to do that. Pear is really pretty, not a worm in it. And keeping all of our pears organic has been challenging over the years because the worms can be really bad some years. There's no sprays at all, not even dormant oil spray this year. No neem oils, no nothing, no sprays at all. Okay, this has a big bruise, but we can go ahead and use most of it. I think. We'll see when we open it up. It might be too bruised all the way through. Pretty bruised it is. All that soft stuff can come out. That bad spot comes right out of there. Good. Take all the soft stuff off. Okay, so our jar is almost full. Make room for that last piece right down in there. Rinse the jar off. That looks nice. Just like that. Okay. Now we'll wipe the tops of the jars off. Let's turn this just a little bit. Tops of the jars need to be clean. Do 2 or 3 jars and then find a clean spot on the towel to be sure that we're not transferring debris from one jar to the next. Okay. Lid should be sterile. Just grabbing them by the edges. Six and 7. Oh, there's an extra one in there for some reason. Okay, finger tight rings. Just like that, finger tight, no wrenching. Oh. I'll grab that other one. 3 more rings and then off to the canner. This one jar looks shorter, like it might be a mayonnaise jar or just a different brand. Test, 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 test. Okay, off to the canner we go. Good. actually, I was going to show you the difference between this rack and where did I put it? This rack. So if you look at this rack on edge, you can see this wire is not even with the center. The center is being held up almost a ½ inch above, so the center jar is a ½ to 3/4 of an inch above the rest of the jars. And I might find a way to tap that down, maybe a big hammer against an anvil or something. But this other rack is more even. It's completely flat across the center, so the jars should be fine using this rack. Yeah, that's pretty even. That's nice. The other rack held the center jar up, and that's not good because there's hardly enough room in these scanners to cover the jars when the jar is so high in the air. Okay, down she goes. We stole some water out of this a minute ago, so we're going to fill that up above the jar lids, and that's perfect. Turn on the stove to high. You see that one's starting to steam already. We've just had it on for a minute, maybe 10 minutes. This one's from cold. We'll give it some time to heat up and start boiling. Okay, this back one's boiling, so we're measuring out 30 minutes. This one's steaming up to boil. A few bubbles, but not rolling yet. As soon as it starts to roll in the boil, then we'll calculate 10 minutes. 10 minutes on the clock. We got a clock up here on the wall with a second hand. The second hand was measuring 30-second pair dip, but we stopped doing that. Just nice to have a clock right there.